On December 25th, 1998, bin Laden gave a series of interviews to international media from a remote area of Helmand, or Kandahar. It appeared to be a new direct violation of the orders given by Mullah Omar, but eyewitness accounts give strong indications that the Taliban were informed of bin Laden's new media appearance and had approved of it beforehand. The Pakistani journalist Jamal Ismail traveled to Kandahar to interview bin Laden on behalf of Al Jazeera. He arrived in the city late one evening in December of 1998 and spent the night in the Taliban's guest house. The next day, a Taliban regime official in Kandahar was informed of his arrival. The official appeared to be well aware of Ismail's errand and put him in touch with bin Laden's men. Shortly afterward, Ismail was met by a group of Arabs led by Abu Hafs al-Masri and eventually taken to a provisional tent camp, a 3-hour drive from Kandahar city, where his now infamous interview with bin Laden took place. From his story, it is evident that at least a local Taliban official in Kandahar knew that a foreign journalist had come to interview bin Laden. Ramamullah Yustafazi is more explicit. He claimed that 2 officials from the Taliban's foreign ministry were present during the interview with the al-Qaeda leader. Quote, 2 Taliban ministry officials who had accompanied us from Kandahar and a dozen bin Laden men, including his teenage son Mohammed, listened in rapt attention as bin Laden spoke, end quote. Taliban had probably granted bin Laden's permission to conduct the interview on the condition that he denied having any direct role in the East Africa embassy bombings. During the interviews, bin Laden did, in fact, speak highly about the Taliban and specifically denied that he had given the order to carry out the bomb attacks in Kenya and Tanzania. But he also made statements that were highly provocative to the United States, such as the now infamous statement that it was a religious duty for Muslims to acquire nuclear and chemical weapons. Bin Laden's remarks led to increased American pressure on the Taliban. On December 30th, 1998, American officials met with Saeed-e-Rahman Haqqani, the Taliban's ambassador to Pakistan, and expressed anger over the bin Laden's media escapades. The American official was furious with bin Laden's statements and said they could no longer trust the Taliban. Haqqani's reaction supports the interpretation that the interviews had indeed been given at the Taliban's permission, but that bin Laden had unexpectedly provoked the United States. According to a U.S. Embassy cable describing the meeting, Haqqani explained, quote, bin Laden was supposed to use the interview to deny involvement and any support for terrorist activities. However, he did not do this. He did not do what he promised. The Taliban are not supportive of what he said. We did not want this. It was a mistake. His comments complaining about the U.S.-British bombing of Iraq went too far. The Taliban cannot support bin Laden's comments against Americans. It is not our policy. He will not be allowed to give any more interviews. This is honestly what happened, end quote. It is interesting to note how bin Laden describes his relationship to the Taliban during the interviews. On one hand, he confirms that he adheres to the orders of Mullah Omar. Quote, we do not work independently here. On the contrary, we are in a country that has an Emir al-Mu'minin. We are obligated by Sharia to obey him as long as this does not contradict God. We have committed ourselves to this country, and we call on people to support it, end quote. However, some obstinacy seems to shine through. Although he denies involvement in international terrorist attacks, he is reluctant to let Mullah Omar silence him. That is, stop him from his incitement activities. Quote, due to the situation in Afghanistan, there is a view among the Taliban that we should not move from Afghan soil against any other state. As everyone knows, this was decided by the Amir al-Mu'minin, but we will continue with the incitement, God willing. And there is no stop to our limited effort during this period, end quote. It is worth recalling bin Laden's attitude to Mullah Omar's orders in the summer of 1998 when he said that he would not stop giving interviews, even if Mullah Omar had asked him to do so. According to Mohammed al-Sudi, he had said, let's see what Islamic law dictates. We also recall that Deobandi clerics in Pakistan had supported bin Laden's call for jihad against the Americans, and that Sheikh Yunus Khalis, a political leader of high religious stature in eastern Afghanistan, probably had permitted bin Laden to give interviews at an earlier stage. In December 1998, it appears that bin Laden still saw it as a legal right to continue inciting his followers, but he eventually had to bow to Taliban pressure. In a meeting between U.S. officials and the Taliban ambassador Saeed-ur-Rahman Haqqani on December 30th, the United States put increased pressure on the Taliban. The Taliban would be held responsible for any terrorist attack carried out by bin Laden, the U.S. official said, and Haqqani promised to convey the message to the Taliban leadership in Kandahar. In early 1999, it appears that Mullah Omar agreed to physically restrict the movements and communications of bin Laden. The most vivid account of this event was given by the Taliban's representative to the UN, Abdul Hakim Mujahid, in an interview with the New York Times published in March of 1999. He said that on February 10, 1999, there had been clashes between a group of Taliban guards and bin Laden's bodyguards. The Taliban guards had attempted to take over responsibility for bin Laden's security, but bin Laden's men had refused. 3 days later, Taliban guards allegedly took control over bin Laden and confiscated his satellite equipment and phone. Their task was to isolate him and ensure that he would not communicate with foreigners. During the event, bin Laden was expelled from Kandahar to a remote place in the mountains. This contradicted the official explanation of Mullah Omar's office in Kandahar, which said that bin Laden had disappeared to an unknown place without informing them of his new destination. The U.S. administration doubted the truth of the statement. They saw it as another attempt by the Taliban to avoid complicity in hosting bin Laden and to protect him from or against new attacks. Conveniently, the disappearance of bin Laden happened shortly after the Taliban received threats from the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad that they must expel bin Laden or face the consequences. The Taliban's official statements regarding bin Laden must be seen in light of the local context. The Taliban at the time were facing pressures from two sides. From the United States, who wanted to expel bin Laden, and from the Taliban's home audience, primarily conservative Muslim networks in Afghanistan and Pakistan. On February 20th, 1999, media reported that mullahs in Afghanistan had warned Mullah Omar against bowing to U.S. demands. If the Taliban expelled bin Laden, they would be seen as giving in to U.S. pressure and risk losing legitimacy among local and regional supporters. Taliban spokesmen in Kandahar were concerned about facing a popular backlash should it become known that they had fallen out with bin Laden or tried to restrict his and anti-American activities. They were left with few options other than to say that bin Laden had disappeared. However, other sources confirmed that it was conflict between bin Laden and Mullah Omar in early of 1999. In February 1999, the director of the Binuri Mosque in Karachi, Mufti Nizamuddin Shamazi, called for an immediate intervention of the ulema in order to end the dispute between Mullah Omar and bin Laden. The fact that high-ranking clerics like Mufti Shazami were involved confirms that the bin Laden issue was not only a bilateral matter between the United States and the Taliban leadership, it was a real dispute between bin Laden and Mullah Omar. After the events in early 1999, bin Laden and Mullah Omar must have reached to some sort of compromise. From then on, there were no more interviews with bin Laden. This is significant considering bin Laden's strong belief in the power of the media. Between January 1999 and December 2001, bin Laden spoke with a foreign journalist only on one occasion, a short interview with the Qa'ida paper Al-Ra'id Am, published November 13, 2000, where he denied involvement in the attack on the USS destroyer Cole on October 10th that year, which killed 17 sailors. Moreover, he denied having any links to a group of suspected terrorists that had recently been arrested in Kuwait. Contrary to previous statements he made, 10 calls, which were calls for jihad against the Americans. Whether consciously or not, He seems to have followed the advice of fellow Arabs in Afghanistan who have called on him to stop violating the orders of Mullah Omar.